This is the 3C session, all about the AID journey. So, as a background, in April 2021, we're obviously aware that continuous glucose monitors and insulin pumps were combined first time commercially to make automated insulin delivery systems. At our centre, we had access to these because we had people on continuous glucose monitors and insulin pumps, but there was no established or validated automated insulin delivery structured education programme. So obviously we were relying on manufacturer support and in-person face-to-face education. And then we've actually looked to change that over the last year to actually delivering a flexible flipped learning approach, and that's what we're going to talk to you about. And essentially we're going to walk you through our PDSA cycles: plan, do, study, act. So really we're going to review the PDA cycles to deliver this structured education, with specifically looking between April 2021 when we started to March 2023, the manufactured support in-person model we had, and how we changed that in April 2023 and what the results have been over the first 6 to 7 months. So first of all, we got ourselves together in November 2022, and we decided that we were going to develop our own curriculum, which is making sure that we followed the good education principles. We looked at the DTN and ATTD consensus statement for education for AID systems, and we previously with our CGM program used a virtual flipped learning program, which allowed us to do a lot of the education via virtual means without necessarily having to do too much face-to-face, thereby allowing us to speed up the onboarding for the same quality. So obviously in January, what we needed to do, if we was going to increase our capacity and change, we needed to actually create some capacity, which we'll discuss. And then what we also then did in February is we ran some of these prototypes of our education with existing users and also with the healthcare professionals, and got some feedback on what was working, so that when we started in March, we were ready to go with a program that at least had some piloting. So in March, we condensed the program into what it looks like today, which is teaching workbooks, survive and thrive guides, and other tools that we'll walk you through. So the first of all, which is the first C, is making capacity. As you will have seen from the first presentation, the 3 Ws, there is no therapy that we've had before, and probably will be no therapy that we have moving forward that will receive such a benefit for the people who use this therapy. At least a sort of 10 to 15% improvement in time in range, reduction in hypoglycemia, and improvements in quality of life. And with the NICE technology appraisal is suggesting, with the 5-year plan with children and people going first, that we should be getting the children and people realistically all on in the first couple of years. Well, we were onboarding with only 4 per month at this point, which means it would take us 8 years to onboard all our children and people, which is unacceptable quite clearly. So the first thing we need to do is create capacity. So the first thing we did is we looked at the children and people who were attending our high HbA1c clinics, which was 3 times a week, and decided we should use those slots to onboard onto hybrid closed loop therapy instead. We also had moved our school training to a virtual program, thereby not necessitating us to go out and do all this school training. We could use that for hybrid closed loop therapy. So we made a commitment to increase our capacity to 12 per month, which means in 2 years we'd have onboarded all the children and people who wanted an automated insulin delivery system to have one. So it's important to take a step back and go, what are we currently doing that we can either stop doing or change to create capacity to increase our onboarding onto this therapy, which has unrivaled benefits for the people who we support. Really important when you're doing the creation, which is the second C, that you use someone's already done the work. The work that has been done in both the DTN and the ATTD consensus guidelines on what needs to be educated about, what to think about hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia, the work has already been done. It's just about reading the guidelines and then, most importantly, adapting it to local needs. You won't just be able to print out the guidelines from here. What you need to do is think about your population, how you're going to apply these potential guidelines, and remember, they are a guideline. The people who wrote these guidelines don't work in your service. They don't have skin in the game for the people who you support. They're just giving you generic good guidelines, and it's your important job to actually adapt those to your local needs based on your population. It may be language challenges, it might be educational challenges. You may need to adapt it accordingly. That's the skill of the clinician and the team to make sure they know their local needs. So what we did, we decided instead of having pump showcases face to face, we'd actually move our selection online. So we created a Google form where we explained what AID therapy is, what the expectations are for going on, explanation of automated insulin delivery systems, what age groups you can do, pros and cons of each system, links to all the key websites where they can find out the information on the different systems, and then say, which system do you want to choose? And if they couldn't choose, then they could obviously then select that they could come in for a one-to-one. And interestingly, at least 80% of the people could choose their system online, which saved a lot of time in terms of not necessitating one-to-one or even group showcases. They could actually make that decision quite clearly with nice information online. Once we'd done that, we actually didn't do, we changed our pre, where we'd normally bring them in face to face, and we actually changed that to a Google form where, again, it would walk through what is hybrid closed loop therapy, how to manage lows, how to manage highs, important things for CGM management and infusion management. We got them to note down their current insulin doses so we could do their starting doses. We got them to actually set up their CareLink accounts or Gluco accounts, actually put their username and password on there. And most importantly, they had to get a score of at least 8 out of 10 before they could go through to us actually ordering the pump. So there's some competency checks. So again, 80% of the people could actually do this online, and 20% of the people who had language challenges or educational challenges, we then brought them in face to face. So there was options for both, but the time that they saved was huge, so it allowed us to increase our onboarding cadence. This is our starting dose calculator. The reason why we developed this, and this was in conjunction with the University of College London, and massive thank you to Francesca Annan and Becky Martin. Essentially, we stole their, they let us use their Excel sheet, and then we adapted it so that what you can do is put in some simple inputs at the top, and then across the bottom you can see here you can get different starting doses for the different systems, which just allows consistency and works off rules that are generally accepted within sort of pump therapy guidelines. So I'm just going to play a short video of how this works so you can get a feel. Here's a quick guide of the clinic checker. So effectively what you do is put all their total daily doses, and then if you want to do a reduction, for example if it's multiple day injections, by how much, what their current basal is, and if you want to do a reduction also. What that would do then is give you some options for multiple basal rates if you needed, and then once you put their weight in, it's only 60 kilos for example, it will then give you suggested correction factors and carb ratios, but obviously you'd only use those if you're very unsure. Once you've done that, you can then click on the individual system tab. And this is the Omnipod 5, for example. It suggests just setting one basal rate because that's all you will need to get the Smarter Just working. A BG target that you can alter depending on what you would like. And then obviously you can move down and set their carb ratios, correction factors, and it automatically populates the maximum bolus, basal, low pod insulin, and their weight and total daily dose. So it's got that for each of the systems. It's an easy way to start and something you can print off, be ready for your session. So obviously that allowed consistent starting guides, and we've tried to make it as simple as possible so when you come to updating 3 monthly clinics, you don't have loads of unnecessary settings that you have to update. But most importantly, what we did create was teaching guides. So these teaching guides are about 60 pages long, and they step by step walk you through how you would onboard as a healthcare provider to actually onboard safely onto an Omnipod 5, Control-IQ or 780G. So we use these as a teaching guide, but we gave them as a QR code for the families to use if they wanted to, because what we actually found is all they want is, what do we actually need to do to survive and thrive? So we created for each one of the systems a survive guide, which is important things they need to carry with them to be safe. How to manage hypoglycemia, and that's based off their weight in terms of using preventative hypoglycemia treatments or hypoglycemia treatments. Massively importantly, how to manage highs, with the idea if you're above 14 for 90 minutes that's unexplained, even though your ketones are low, these systems that shouldn't be happening, and maybe you need to change the infusion set. And obviously how to manage ketones. Infusion site management is specific to the system, and then importantly making sure you've got effective CGM management. So this is the survive page, which is basically if you follow this, you will do well and you'll be safe on a hybrid closed loop system. If you want to thrive, obviously you need to be ordering your supplies, but most importantly from a food and insulin perspective, what are the basics? Insulin before meals, balanced meals, being careful for high fat meals, just starting with your usual carbs and then seeing what happens, and some strategies. If you forget to bolus, what to do, and then some basics on exercise management. So we know if people follow these, they're the people who will be getting sort of 70s to 75% timing range. The more of these you follow, the more effective the timing range will be. But the importance of having these as a service is, it doesn't matter who's delivering the session, as long as they follow the step-by-step plan, they will get the effective and safe education. And most importantly, for the families who walk away, they've got a simple 2-page guide of just the key things that they need to do to be successful on this automated insulin delivery therapy. And the key thing here is not to overcomplicate. Before, on insulin pump therapy, we used to have to do basal rate testing, carb ratio testing, correction factor testing, and all these complicated things that will put people off, especially people of limited educational abilities. Therefore, we make it as simple as we possibly can and provide QR codes where they can dip back into the necessary videos as required. Should make the education much simpler and much more easier to understand. We also developed a download assessment tool, so we all know that when people come back to clinic, if you've got 4 systems, you've got a serious job on your hands to remember what settings will change how the algorithm works and what needs updating back in manual mode to make sure if they go back into manual mode, how they will go. Furthermore, how to actually do an assessment. First of all, look at 90% auto mode, then look at time below, time in range, and then things. So I'm just going to play this little video here so you can see how the tool works. And this is what we use in clinic and you can get access to. Again, it may not be perfect for you, but what it will do is give you a directional look at what needs to be adjusted. With a key point is this calculator needs to be treated as an absolute idiot. It gives you recommendations or suggestions based off the average person's weight, average person, whatever their units per kilo is, and whatever percentage basal that you put and you want them to have. So it gives you for the average person, and the person who you see in front of you is unlikely to be the average person. So you must use your clinical judgment in interpreting the suggestions. And if someone is already having fantastic time in range, you wouldn't go in changing anything based off what this calculator says because it's an idiot. It's just literally presenting you suggestions based off standardized rules for someone's average insulin dose for their weight, for example. So please bear that in mind with the tool. I would hate someone to pick this up and use it and go, oh yeah, this suggests someone's on a carb ratio of 1 to 15. This suggests 1 to 6. Let's change it to 1 to 6. That quite clearly would be a ridiculous thing to do. So obviously, please use your clinical judgment. Treat it as an idiot, but an idiot that may be able to help and guide.
Here's just a quick guide of the AID clinic calculator. You first of all put their total daily dose from the last 14 days and their weight, then the percentage of basal you'd like to update their manual settings to, and then you select the system. And then it tells you what settings can be adjusted that will affect how the algorithm works. So for the CAMs, that's the personal glucose target or carb ratios, and it makes some suggestions if people are not within 60% time in range. And it tells you what needs updated in manual mode, for example, manual basal rates and certain things depending where it's IPSA or DANA. So something you can guide yourself in the clinic. It also then has an assessment process looking at auto modes over 90%, the time in range percentages, and then some advice on the Survive and Thrive guides that can also be found in the resources. And then finally, where you're aiming for in terms of targets. Now, if you change this, for example, to a T-Slim, you can see what changes is different, so you know what will affect the algorithm here, and you know what will need updating in manual mode. And similarly for the Omnipod 5 or the 780G, for example, what will affect the algorithm. Now, obviously, you might think that the active insulin time and carb ratio might not affect the algorithm, but it will, because if you increase or decrease the insulin on board, that will affect how Smart Adjust works. So it's just something to consider. So that's just a quick guide of how the clinic calculator works. It's be useful in clinic just to make sure you know what will change the algorithm, and also you know what needs updating in manual mode.
Important to note here, there is a little guide on how to assess each of the downloads at the top. If you have this tool open, you will just click on here and it's sending you through to a video of how to pull a download and what to consider. Same for a T-Slim and same for an Omnipod 5. It's not telling you how to do it, it's just telling you how we do it. Okay, so now that you've seen the program that we developed, that we started in March 2023, what was essentially the results? What we wanted to do is have a retrospective look at the results for the people who was on the old manufacturer supported in-person system versus the new flexible flipped learning system. So in the 2-year period, you onboarded 74 via the old system and then 91 on this new flexible system where those who could educate virtually would do the vast majority of that virtually, but those who still needed it one-to-one could be provided that. We wanted to have a look at the demographic and glucose outcomes and also the onboarding time requirements. So this is from an article that's in press, so we'll be publishing this soon, but I'll give you sort of a heads up of what we saw. So these are the two programs, the virtual flip learning program which I discussed. They would select via the online program that we showed. They would do their pre-education online via Google Form. They would actually come in and physically do the face-to-face where we would teach them how to go on the system, and then we would do 2 follow-ups virtually. So you can see here that requires 8 hours of education time, only 2 hours of travel time, and 10 hours of diabetes educator time per group of 4. Whereas on the flip side, the in-person program, which we need to do for some people who wouldn't do the virtual program for challenges with language and also education, they would actually come in and select themselves. They'd have to come in and do the pre-education with us, and then similarly they would onboard with us and the follow-ups would be with us. And this in-person program is what we used to do for everybody in groups of 4 or one-to-ones with manufacturer support. And you can see on average there's a lot more time required from a travel perspective. There's double the time required from the educators, and again you can see there's a big difference in terms of the actual onboarding time. What we found is on the top here is this is the manufacturer supported, the old way of doing it, and on the bottom group B is the new way of doing it. And really what you can see is that both groups equally improved time in tight range from about 28-30% up to 40%, time in range from about 49% to 64%, and obviously reductions in time above range. So both groups achieved the same improvements that were seen in the evidence base, if not more, but there was no difference between the two groups. So both groups did exactly the same in terms of improvements in time in range and time above range. And because this group was already using CGM at baseline, there was no difference in hypoglycemia, because generally CGM alone is adequate to have a low hypoglycemia risk. So what you should take from this is obviously you get the same benefits from doing things virtually the majority of the time as you do purely face-to-face. So then when we look at the important thing of, well, if you're getting the same results, what are the actual time requirements? Well, you can see that the time required from healthcare professionals was halved, only 200 hours versus close to 400 hours. So that frees up a lot of educator time to actually then increase the onboarding cadence and also supply extra support for the children, young people from families that require interpreters or have educational challenges. And this is the important thing here. So Group A, these are their demographics on here, and then these are Group B's demographics. And what you will notice is that in Group B, we were able to onboard those from a higher level of deprivation. So the lower the score, the more deprived. So we're able to access a group this way with more high levels of deprivation because we had more time to do one-to-ones for those who needed it. Furthermore, the children and people from Black heritage are generally often within our cohort are the ones who need interpreters from African and Somali backgrounds. So we were able to onboard those at a higher cadence than previously because we had more educated time to be able to do that. So again, what you can really see here is we're able to not only increase the onboarding speed, we were also able to do supply support and onboard to those people from the most deprived and usually underserved demographics with regards to access to technology. This is a note from Pauline, who's our administrator, who's an absolute diamond. Essentially, I asked her what really worked with communication with the families who we've previously struggled to get in. And simply she said, letters don't work. They're too slow, you've got a transient cohort, there's a lot of temporary accommodation and hotels, and often they end up in the bin because they can't be understood and they're too long and too complex. So really, letters don't work to try and get the children and people in from these challenging language and deprived demographics. Phone, again, is a real challenge because you have to be able to speak different languages to be able to communicate with the different varieties of languages that we have within our demographic, up to 15 or 20 different languages. And again, often the families may not have credit to phone back if you leave messages, and often power sometimes can be a problem. Emails also don't work because there's no immediate notification, often end up in the junk mail, and sometimes a lack of credit will mean that they're unable to access the internet. So all of your standard ways of usually communicating with these children, people and families from these language challenged and also, well, not language challenged, different languages and social deprivation require a different way of communication. And what Pauline tells me is that really Accurix, which is an NHS approved where you can log in with your NHS login and you can actually text message people directly to their phone. And most families have at least one phone. And the key thing here is they have an immediate notification. It can overcome a language barrier because it's often a family member or a neighbour or a support staff within their community who understands English. And also it comes from a trusted source because it comes from the fact it comes from your trust, and they can actually reply directly to the Accurix message, so they can respond to you via text message. And also the schools accept as evidence as a medical appointment, so you don't have to worry about, oh, they haven't had a letter, they can actually show the text message. So Pauline's top tips are, first of all, make the message short and very clear. Make sure that you tick the bottom right hand box to allow them to respond. Ensure that the phone number that is on Accurix actually matches the most accurate one you've got on your records. And obviously the records are kept, so you've got an audit trail, so you can copy them onto your database or your medical records, and you also can then resend the messages as reminders. And you can actually attach PDF documents as well if you need to send things through, such as letters, etc. You can actually attach them to that. So this is an example of one that Pauline would suggest is something important. Start and only put 5, make it very clear. We're offering the dates. You must attend all 4 dates. Please confirm by replying and tick the bottom. Something short, simple, and the amount of times we have come back saying, yes, we can attend, and they actually turned up. Whereas previously with letters, we would have serious challenges. So getting your communication, your administration right is absolutely imperative. This is just to show with the children and people who onboarded all of those 165 in groups A and B. We brought them into tertiles of levels of deprivation. So obviously the most deprived with the lowest score here, the second most deprived and the least deprived. And what you'll notice is that obviously there's a big difference in deprivation across the 3 groups, but there's absolutely no difference in mean blood glucose, time in range, time in tight ranges. They all achieved the same level of glucose control, which really speaks to the power of automated insulin delivery systems to actually cope with varying insulin requirements and even potentially some less self-management behaviours. So it just really speaks to how powerful these systems are. Similarly, across different ethnic groups, again, you can see here white children, young people, Asian children, young people, and black children, young people. What you can see here, there is absolutely no difference in the glucose outcomes that they achieved. What will be interesting for us to see in the future is, does this replicate with HbA1c? Because if you listen to my previous presentation, you will know that for the same mean blood glucose, children and people from black heritage have a higher HbA1c. So that remains to be seen. But certainly in terms of glucose outcomes, you can see that they achieve parity across the different ethnic groups, again speaking to the important fact that the distribution and allocation of these automated insulin delivery systems is equitable across all ethnic groups. If you want to have a look at HbA1c from a more limited number, about 100 children and people that we've had on so far, basically saying it shows the same as the pilot trial. The higher the HbA1c you start with, the greater the drop in HbA1c, which is just again to say that children and people with higher HbA1c should not be precluded from going on to these therapies because they're the ones who achieve the biggest benefit in terms of HbA1c and their future risk. So here's James to tell us a little bit about, more so rather than the numbers, what does it mean in real life to go into one of these systems?
The upsides of the pump is it does automatic injections, you can't feel it, and it also does automatic injections, and it also stops the injection when you're going low.
And is it better than being on pen injections?
Yes, a lot better than being on pen injections.
And have you felt better or worse since you've been on the pump?
Better.
How much better?
100%.
So for me to hear that, it just reminds me of my son. I love the way he put his hand up. But yeah, 100% better. You know, we look at timing ranges, improve HbA1cs, but what you have to realize is the children, people and families on the end of this are receiving a lot less time thinking about diabetes. Parents and young children, people are getting full night's sleep. They're feeling better, they're performing better, they're coming back to clinic buzzing with how different their life is with diabetes. That is more powerful than anything to do with numbers, although numbers and HbA1cs mean saved money in the future. Let's not forget the fact that these children, people and families are receiving the biggest benefit, which is less burden on their life through diabetes. So please bear that in mind. So in review, we've basically changed our approach over the last year, and we've managed to increase our onboarding cadence by 5 using a program which we've now shown is effective. And also, just the key thing is, if you allow people who can self-educate to do it via online and virtual materials, that will free up capacity to make sure your onboarding is equitable to those in the most deprived social circumstances and from different ethnic groups. And it's imperative that we make sure that those people are serviced by these automated insulin delivery systems, because in reality, they're the ones who are going to get the biggest benefit, because they're potentially starting with the higher HbA1cs or the lower timing ranges. So obviously all these materials are available for you to use through the click of a download. Feel free to adapt and use them as you so see fit, but hopefully that's given you an idea of how service change is possible. And yeah, we'll move on.